Hi there, it's Alexandra from the Middlesized Garden YouTube channel and blog, and it's the summer garden tour. So the Middlesized Garden is in southeast England, and it roughly equates to a USDA zone of 9 in the winter, because our winters very rarely go below -6 Celsius, 21 Fahrenheit. In the summer, they're much cooler. It should be around 23, 24 Celsius, 25, even 80 Fahrenheit. But recently it's been a very hot June. It's been a super dry spring. We've been in drought and there's a hosepipe ban. Even so, we've just had some really good rain, but the weather is now very changeable. It'll be pouring with rain 1 minute and broad sunshine the next. The garden is 100 feet long and 80 feet wide at its widest, but it's L-shaped, so it's 40 feet wide nearer the house. And it's a walled town garden. From the back door, you come up some steps to what we call the parterre, which is a square area just outside the back door. And on one side is the shady north-facing border, and on the other side is our main herbaceous border, which is the one where I try to get all the colour, which I put all my gardening effort into, and which I have to say is the most difficult part of the garden. But first, the shady border. Now, a lot of people don't like hydrangeas, but my goodness, they have saved this garden in what has been quite a difficult summer. They came out a few weeks ago, and as you can see, there's Annabelle there, more Annabelle there. They look different. I really don't know why, probably because there's more shade there. There's some oak leaf hydrangeas there, and then the hydrangea at the back of the garden is one that was here when we came here 24 years ago. So they're long-lasting. I literally prune them once a year, do nothing else to them, and they are so easygoing. The flowers will slowly go over and they'll become brown sculptured seed heads in the winter. So that's nearly 6 months of interest. What's not to love? On this side of the garden, it's more difficult because I've been trying to sort of plant it and replant it, and some things do well, some things don't. But before I talk about the main herbaceous border, I'd just like to point out the lavender. Now, we've recently had the lavender replaced. We had some really lovely big lavender, which I absolutely adored. But when we put the pergola in, we had to take it out partly because it was very old and partly because we were making this central bit a little bit bigger. So I wanted to find the big lavender. So I researched, which is the bigger lavender? Is it Munstead or Hidcote? Because I knew I'd have one of those two. And I got very contradictory information. And one of the things I noticed was that roundup at the top, when you put something into a search engine and you get an AI roundup at the top, that's the sort of information that's very often wrong. And I got very confused. I got told, Munstead's the biggest, Hidcote's the biggest. So I went through to the lavender sellers and they all said that both of them were between 1/2 metre and 1 metre high. So I just took a risk, just thought, well, I'll get Munstead. And then a garden designer friend told me that the way you remember which is the bigger of Hidcote or Munstead is that Munstead is mini, M for Munstead, M for mini, and Hidcote is the high, high for Hidcote, H for high, which would have been lovely, but I'm now stuck with the smaller lavender, and I don't think that I want to go to the bother of digging it all up and putting the larger lavender there. When it comes to the main herbaceous border, the main jobs in summer are deadheading and irrigation. Now, if you plant plants that are happy in your soil and your climate and in the position they're in the garden, they won't really need watering, even in a drought, once they're established. But if you've got any new plants, and I've got a few new ones, some salvias and some lupins, they will need watering in their first summer. Now, I've just talked to Janet Manning, who is the RHS's water management horticultural consultant, and I'll put that video in the description below because it's so useful in terms of water. And she said that one of the things you need to remember about plants is that if they have a bit more water than they need, they simply transpire it through their leaves. They open up the little holes called the stomata, and it goes out through there. And if they've got a bit less water than ideal, they close up the stomata and use less. So actually the soil can get quite dry before the plants really suffer. And of course the main point is not to use too much water and spend too much time, and if you're metered too much money on watering, just give the plants what they need. So it is worth checking how dry the soil is around them. I've actually, since speaking to her, bought a moisture meter, and before I do watering, which I have to do in a watering can because we've got a hosepipe ban, I do just pop the moisture meter into the soil and check the reading, and if it says moist or wet, I don't water. And I can tell you I have watered so much less, because I used to just think, well, I'll give them all lots of water and that'll last a bit of time, and then 2 days later I'd think the same thing. So I was definitely overwatering my plants. Now, deadheading. Now, this is probably your most important job in the summer. And when I interviewed Frances Moskowitz about her amazing herbaceous border, and I'll put that in the description below too, she said she deadheaded 4 times a day, which I most certainly am not going to do. However, what she did say is that she keeps a pair of snips by the back door, and anytime she pops out, she'll just snip anything that she can see. And that's something I definitely do. I don't make deadheading a once a week job. I just simply go out every morning with a cup of tea, or if I'm going out just to stretch my legs, the snips are by the back door, and you can just deadhead like this. When I spoke to Neil Miller at Hever Castle about roses, he said when you deadhead roses, you can deadhead them individually like this, or if you've got 2 or 3 on a stem and they're both dead, you can actually go right down and take the whole lot off. Now, you'll see that I've just been throwing the roses into the border. It's something I've always done, and I always wondered whether perhaps it was the right thing, but it's just easier. And then I saw Troy Scott-Smith, the head gardener at Sissinghurst, on Instagram, actually saying that that's what he does. So if it's good enough for Sissinghurst, it's definitely good enough for me. You go up the steps from the parterre onto the back lawn, and this is a very sort of wide open space with borders around the edges. And these 2 back borders are really quite difficult because obviously they're against a high wall, there are trees, they're shady, and so I need to have quite kind of resilient plants growing there. I recently interviewed Anne Wareham and Charles Hawes, whose garden Vedder has now been named one of the 100 most beautiful gardens in Britain, and minimises her work in the garden, because it's 2 acres, by having what she calls plant thugs, and they're plants that are really resilient, they'll grow and they'll spread. And quite frankly, along this back wall, plant thugs is what I need. The main thug, as you can see, is Phlomis russelliana, and that seems to absolutely flourish by the wall and under the tree. And of course, we live in a very dry part of Britain. Anne is in Wales, which is actually the wetter part of Britain. So Persicaria is a good thug for her, but Persicaria would struggle to be a thug in that part of my garden. So when you're looking at thugs, it's always worth remembering they won't be thuggish in every part of the country. They will be thuggish in particular areas. So if you don't want a thug or you do want a thug, make sure to remember that, because sometimes people say, oh, that's just a really invasive plant. And what they mean is it's a really invasive plant for their area. There's another thug here, which is Japanese anemone. And it's just not been as thuggish as usual for the last few years. It's just 1 or 2 flowers at the moment, and it has been really thuggish in the past. So something's changed in the weather that it hasn't liked. I think possibly it hasn't liked the dry springs. Last year I decided to give up growing vegetables because I felt I wasn't very good at vegetables. They're quite hard work, and I live in a country town, so we can buy locally grown fresh vegetables quite easily at the market. So these 3 vegetable beds I have been growing wildflowers in. What I did was I got 3 specialist seeds, wildflower seeds, from 3 specialist seed companies. This one came from Kent Wildflowers, this one came from Pictorial Meadows, it's Nigel Dunnett's classic mix that was used at the Olympics in 2012, and this one is Boston Seeds Shade Mix. Now, I do see quite a lot on the internet, again, that is quite misleading about broadcast sowing seeds, particularly wildflower seeds. And there seems to be something called chaos gardening, which suggests you could just mix a whole load of seeds together and just cast it on the soil and then wait and see what happens. Broadcast sowing is easy and it is cheap, but if you're going to grow wildflowers, they should be the specialist wildflowers for your area. Not all flowers will grow happily from broadcast. What you have to do is at least prepare the soil a bit, which is rake it over so it's fairly flat. You scatter the seeds. It needs to know exactly how many per square metre, and that will be on the seed packet. And you have to water them until they get established. So then very little care, but they're not no care. And if you just scatter a whole load of mixed seeds onto some bare soil, you'll get very variable results. And what you definitely won't get is those brightly coloured, contrasting AI pictures of wonderfully colourful plants all next to each other. This border was blues last year. It's actually been the same packet of seeds. It was all blues. It was Viper's bugloss and cornflowers. This year it's wild carrot. This whole border's got very tall. Now I think wild carrot is quite tall anyway, but what it's done is blocked the light from the pictorial meadows, which has got very leggy, and it's kind of not really worked. So that's another thing to think about, whether you've got very tall flowers in front of not such tall flowers. The other thing is that will make wildflowers a bit leggy is that they like poor soil. And of course a vegetable garden is probably too rich soil. Now on this side here, the Boston Shade seeds mix, there was lots of lovely red campion, which is a pink flower, earlier this year. And I now really love the teasel or dipsarcus because it's fantastic for wildlife, but it can spread, so, and as can the wild carrot. So I will probably have a lot of teasel and wild carrot popping up in my borders in years to come. While we're talking about self-seeders, I must point out this verbascum. It's completely wild, it's completely self-sown, and I'm absolutely thrilled to see that it's planted itself in between the lower lawn and the upper lawn. And actually this is just what I wanted, some lovely long tall spikes dividing up the space. And it's also quite nibbled with mullein moth, but I don't really mind that. And it's just lovely, I think. And it shows you how self-seeders can actually be such a joy in the garden. Once again, I can see that there's probably going to be quite a problem with it going everywhere. We had to pull out about 40 little tiny mulleins out of the path. But it's lovely, so I like it. Now let's have a look at what's happened to the Cotinus. The Cotinus was an amazing tree when we first came here. It's been here probably for 30, 40 years. It had grown enormous. It had wonderful multicoloured leaves, but parts of it kept dying and we kept cutting those off, and eventually last year we cut it right down to the ground, and the core of it, the heart of it, was absolute sawdust. I thought that was the end of the plant. Well, as you can see, all these leaves have come up. They've shot up. It's now basically a large shrub. I think we'll keep it like this. I'm going to not cut it down this winter because next year it will have those wonderful kind of smokebush flowers. But if I wanted to keep it just for its foliage, and quite a lot of gardeners do this, then we would cut it right down to the ground in winter every year. If you want to know more about growing wildflowers, don't miss the video that I've done coming up next about how to create a wildflower border. And thank you for watching. Goodbye.